Panchakosha tattanmaya iva sthitaha Shuddhatma Nilavastradi Yogena Sfatiko Yatha Panchakoshadi Yogena Tattanmaya Iva Sthitaha Shuddhatma Nilavastradi Yogena Sfatiko Yatha. By its identification with the five sheets, the immaculate Atman appears to be like them, just as a crystal appears blue or so on when in contact with the blue cloth and so on. Panchakoshadi yogena tattanmaya iva sthitaha. Iva, that's the Sanskrit word iva means like. It appears to be like them. It doesn't really become them. Now, the five koshas are the five sheets, because it talks of the five sheets here. The five sheets are the pranamaya kosha, which is known as the vital air sheet, annamaya kosha, which is the food sheet, manomaya kosha, which is the mental sheet, vijnanamaya kosha, which is the intellectual sheet, anandamaya kosha, which is the bliss sheet. I'm sure you all are very familiar. I shall repeat. First is the pranamaya kosha, which is the vital air sheet. Second is I'm talking in the hierarchy of gross to subtle. Then comes the annamaya kosha, which is the food sheath. Manomaya kosha, which is the mental sheath. Vijnanamaya kosha, which is the intellectual sheath. And anandamaya kosha is the bliss sheath. Now, when you say a word, when you say sheath, when you say, what do you mean sheath? What do you gather when you say a sheath? Sheath is that which covers something, isn't it? Point one. Point two, when it covers it, it doesn't contact it, it doesn't rupture that which it is covering. For example, when you put a sword in a sheath, you may put the sword in and out, take in and out n number of times, but the sword doesn't get blunt, even though it's covered by the sheath. And yet it covers it, and yet doesn't contact the tip of the sword. It just covers it. It just envelopes it. But it doesn't condition it. It doesn't limit it. It doesn't contact it. So that's what the sheath is. So the five layers or the sheets, the five sheets are nothing but gross body, subtle body, causal body. You must understand this. The causal body is bliss sheath. The subtle body is manomaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha, and certain part of pranamaya kosha is the subtle body, and then annamaya kosha is the gross body. So gross, subtle, causal bodies are divided into the five sheets which we just mentioned. So these sheets cover the Atman, the self. Now, they cover the Atman, he says, just like a crystal Atman appears to be like them. Why? Just like the crystal appears blue when in contact with the blue cloth. So when the Atman is in contact with the equipments, it appears to be conditioned by the body, mind, and intellect, but yet You and I know Atman is way beyond the conditioning. It is not possible for these equipments to condition the Atman. Why? Atman is too subtle. And the principle you got to understand here is the gross cannot influence or control the subtle. Now, what can influence the gross is anything grosser. The gross cannot influence the subtle. So the world has no influence on the Atman. The world only influences the individual, the body, mind, and intellect. But then is there not a logical fallacy in the argument? Gross cannot influence the subtle. The world cannot influence the Atman, the self. The world, gross can only influence anything gross. But now the world influences our physical body, the world influences our mind, the world influences our intellect, doesn't it? Why does the world affect you? Okay, can anybody claim to say that, sir, yes, I'm living in the world and yet I'm not affected by the world? I am not influenced at all. I experience heat and cold, but I'm not affected by heat and cold. I experience energy and tiredness, but I'm not affected by energy and tiredness. I experience joy and sorrow, but I'm not affected by joy and sorrow. I'm experiencing knowledge and ignorance, but I'm not conditioned by knowledge and ignorance. Can we say so? Then why is the world affecting us? Vijay Raghavanji, why is the world affecting us?
I'm not there yet, Guruji.
Okay. No problem. Why are we being affected by the world? Sudhakar Garu?
We are very much getting indulged in the world, and that is the reason why we are getting affected by the world. Our indulgence, because of our indulgence and involvement with the worldly affairs.
Because of our indulgence. Okay, you conveyed this concept of the spirit. Yes, you're right, absolutely right. It is because of our identification with the world influences us. What is the law or the principle of identification? We have often said this. The law, it's called the law of attachment. The law of attachment. Sudhakar Garu, can you remember what's the law of attachment?
It comes through the desire. It is born out of our desires.
But I'm talking about the law.
I'm not sure, I think, Guruji.
Right. No, the moment we mention, you will be very sure. You know it. I know that you know it. The law of attachment. What is the law of attachment? As Hariji puts it, Hariji, if you will have to hold your answers back. Huh? You will only answer until you're asked. The law of attachment is as you think, so you become. It is a law of identification. The mother identifies with the child. Whatever happens to the child happens to the mother. In fact, the mother has so much identified with the child that the mother knows exactly what's happening to the child. That the mother knows why the child is crying. The father will be wondering what has happened. Is it because the child is hungry, or is it because there's something discomfort, or is it messed up the diapers, or I do not know what is wrong. The father doesn't know. He's not able to come to an understanding. There's no clarity. It's because there is no identification. His thoughts are engrossed with something else. He's occupied with something else. So the mother gets worried. The father doesn't get worried. Why? There's no identification. Not that he doesn't have any feeling or love, but he has not become that because of no identification. Now, what is happening is, if you carefully look at, in principle, all our thoughts and ideas, all our attention is only confined to the material world, to the physical, mental, intellectual. And because of our thoughts and identification, we have become the world. So whatever happens, the fluctuations in the world, you're fluctuated by it. You're really subjecting yourself to those modulations, to those undulations, to those vicissitudes, to those fluctuations in the world, because you are identifying with them. But if you do not identify with them, you remain unaffected by the world, because the world does not affect the Atman. The only thing that remains uninfluenced or unaffected by the world is the Atman. Now, I have a choice. I identify with the world or I identify the self within. This choice we all of us have. As I've just said, you must be able to differentiate between the world and the self. The world is just superimposing on the self. If you have the ability to separate that which is superimposing onto and the self, and you choose what to identify with, you make all the difference. That makes all the difference. The spiritual journey begins by separating, and it gives beautiful examples. And the entire identification is unintelligent identification. It is just unintelligent identification. So what would be the opposite of it? That doesn't mean we pack our bags and go. We can't go somewhere. Can we go anywhere? Can we leave the world and go somewhere? You can't. You're all the time in contact with it. But how is it possible? Is it possible that you remain in it and yet not be attached to it? The whole philosophy is to be able to be in relation with it and yet not be bound by it. The whole quintessence of Vedanta, the whole quintessence of Shastras is trying to empower us to remain detached while you are bound by your own duties and responsibilities. All of us are bound to perform our bounden duties. We are bound. You can't escape them. No scripture or Shastras says to abandon action. The other day we were saying action is the quintessence of life. Where there is no action, there is no life. So you got to remain active. Now, what do I do being active? I got to do what my Swadharma compels me to do, what my Dharma wants me to do. I'm born with it. I can't do something which is not my Dharma. So you got to perform your Dharma, but not to the extent where you are enmeshed, you're enveloped, it clouds you, it deludes you. So it is that they are concerned with. It is not what you're doing. It's how you're going about doing it. So if you go about doing whatever you're doing with a right identification. So if you have a right identification, you will remain detached. An unintelligent identification, you develop an attachment and then you pay the price, you pay the consequences. So we are conditioned to believe that we are the limited self. Therefore, we identify with the self. We identify with the world. You become the limited self, and then you are vulnerable. Atman appears to be just like as a crystal, as he says, appears blue when in contact with a blue cloth. It just appears. You pour water in a blue tumbler, the water appears blue. The water is not blue. The world does not affect you, should not affect you. But when you are affected, it's because of your own making. There's nothing out there that should affect you. Principally, nothing should affect you. it should sink in. It should sink into us that I'm allowing myself to be a victim of my creation. What is that concept of every time I'm corrected how to pronounce this? Am I pronouncing it correctly? Is it the Frankenstein? Am I pronouncing it right? Harishji? Correct, huh? Whether it's a British English, American English, some English, please correct me, I had one of my students all the time used to correct me. I used to say, Einstein. It's not Einstein, it's Einstein. So I said, sir, I need to. I am very ignorant. I need to learn many things. So what is a Frankenstein? Unmute yourself, Harishji.
It's a monster.
Oh, who's a monster?
Frankenstein monster.
Ah.
So Frankenstein refers to a figment of imagination where you create a larger than life, generally horrific association.
All right. So what is the parallel of Frankenstein in the context here?
It's the attachments and desires which devour you.
Devour you. And all, as you rightly said, it's a figment of your imagination. So you have imagined, oh, I want to become a professional. I want to become a businessman. I want to do this. I want to achieve that. You want to become something. You want to make something of your life. And whatever you have created, what happens there? You only spoke half of the story. What happens later half of the story? That Frankenstein, the monster, what does the monster do?
It consumes you, it overtakes you,
It destroys you.
It destroys you.
It destroys. So you are the creator, you should be the master, but you become a victim of your own creation. I don't understand the rationale of the whole happenings. Isn't it weird? Isn't it saddening? And that is what the Shastras say. You are a master of the creation. You should be the master, not a slave. I create something and I become a slave to it. I have a family and I become a slave to my family. So my family is a Frankenstein, is destroying me. I start business and family, business becomes a Frankenstein. Business is destroying my peace of mind. So business is a Frankenstein. As long as you create, you are a master and you're not affected by it, you're a master. You remain a master. You don't become a victim of that creation. And that's possible only when you don't develop a wrong identification with it. You don't develop an attachment to it. And when is it you don't develop an attachment? I don't want to get into it, but just quickly mention it. When is it you will remain detached? Or rather, I would put it the other way, go back to the same question. When does one develop an attachment to something? When does one develop an attachment to anything? And as I said, we are attached to something or the other that is sitting on your head, that's causing you enormous stress and a concern or worry. The question is, when do you develop an attachment? Sedramanji.
Hariom Guruji.
Hariom, sir.
One get attached when one identifies with it.
That we already mentioned, but when, okay, what is it that determines you getting attached? Are you attached to everything in life? Sadly so. I can't say no to it, but there are certain things that you're attached to. What is it that determines your attachment to them? It could be material possessions, it could be emotions, it could be family, it could be anything out there.
desire.
The desire is for everything, but what is it that determines why you are attached to something and I'm not attached to it? Vice versa. What is it that no, vasanas are not vasanas? Not, you're being very generic. I'm being very specific here. Yeah, Vijayji.
When you get dependent on getting something from anything which you get attached to.
Now, dependency is after attachment, but you're already presupposing there. But I'm asking, what is it that starts the process of getting attached?
Your mind allows it. You get the very first time you get attracted to the idea, the fleeting idea becoming larger and so on. I think we had saw somewhere else. And it slowly grows into an, obsession or addiction or whatever, mental addiction. And then it becomes, you expect something out of it, to receive something out of it. Then you're dependent on receiving something out of it.
Yeah. You're right. Yes, you're right. Okay. Okay. Tinkima, you want to say something? You had something to say?
Identification with it?
Yeah, identification is another word for attachment, but why would you identify with something is the question. Why would you identify?
Our desires lead us to that, and we believe that that is the truth.
You're getting there.
Mithya is what is mithya we take to be the truth.
Yeah, correct. We believe that which is
temporary and changing and just a mirage is taken to be the truth.
taken to be the reality.
So either we don't have the knowledge.
Right.
We maybe if I had never studied or attended your classes, I would continue to imagine the world to be the truth. So we don't have the knowledge, or we're ignorant about it. We don't know.
Correct. So the whole process of attachment starts because of the familiar word I keep using is the value you give to something. One other day we were mentioning of it. There is an initial fascination or a value, or rather I would say the black market value you give to something. And that value you give to something is based on your knowledge quotient, your wisdom, how wise you are. A man who is endowed with wisdom is not charmed by the lower realms of the world. He understands the hollowness or the futility in them. He is not charmed by them. He may possess and he may even enjoy them, but he is not a slave to them. He doesn't worship them. He doesn't become a slave to them. He doesn't develop an attachment to them. So it all starts with an inward value your mind has given to something, and then it sets the tone or the direction for the mind to flow unchecked, ungoverned, unpoliced. When you let the mind run wild towards something it has a fascination for, you invariably develop attachment. You become a slave to it. And how do you come out of it is through the process of discrimination. You need to have that viveka, you need to have that knowledge of the higher to be able to look at your life from a higher standpoint. All that we are doing is trying to look at your current position from a higher standpoint. It's like when you scale a mountain, when you keep going higher, as you keep going higher, the perception changes, the panoramic vision becomes much broader. You're able to, all that which meant overwhelming becomes minuscule, don't they? Just like when you take an aircraft and you fly off, within the next 5 minutes, you start peeping from the window. You find everything becomes minuscule. It becomes like a modular city on a, what's that, Rajima? Lilliput, huh? Is that what you said? Even the mighty skyscrapers becomes just Lilliput buildings for you. What has happened? You have just taken a grander vision to it. In fact, I remember the example I'm quoting. I remember Mickey from one of the classes, he was mentioning when you, let's say you're meandering in a jungle and you're lost, you don't know where you're heading. And remember, he said the best, one of the ways to find out where you're heading is climb a tree. If you can climb a tree, try to climb as high as you can. The moment you climb, you will get a panoramic vision as to where's the way out. So you've got to raise your vision to a higher level so that you gain clarity as to where you need to head, what you need to do. And that is all this knowledge gives us. That clarity, it gives us what to and what not to, where to and where not to. So that you go back to where you are and establish a healthy relationship with it. That's about all. The Shastras are not telling us to abandon the world. They're not telling you to renounce the world. Renunciation is all a mental attitude. It is not a physical dispossession, please. It's a dispossessive attitude to your possession. It is to have an emotion without an infatuation. It's to have an understanding without an obsession. To have an emotion without an infatuation, to have an possession without that possessive attitude. And that's only possible when I go back into my life with a grander vision, with a greater perception. So your thoughts are elsewhere, but you go on carrying on whatever you're doing. Doing what? What you're duty bound. And this is what the spirit of detachment is. So the Atman remains detached. It only appears to be influenced, but it doesn't. But you have the choice to remain uninfluenced by the world by choosing to identify with the self. The moment you shift your focus of identification from the world onto the self, you gain the attributes or qualities of what you're attached to. Just like he says, the crystal appears blue because of its identification. You think of the self, you gain the attributes of the self. The self has no attributes though, but what are the qualities, known descriptions of the self? Self is a pure witness. One of the qualities of the self, the Atman, is a pure witness to the entire proceedings. It's just an observer. So you become an observer to the happenings in your life, just like you're an observer to me and I'm an observer to all of you now. Similarly, you become an observer to your perceptions, to your emotions, to your own thoughts. And you will actually see them coming and passing by, and you will choose, am I to identify with this perception? Am I to hold on to this emotion? Am I to discard this thought? You would say, thank you very much. I'll have none at my hands, nothing doing. I am a witness. And that is the path. That is the spiritual path. That's the journey. So it is a very subtle implication to embrace, to learn, to live that life of detachment. And how you do that is just by shifting your focus. What are you identifying with? Shift your focus from the lower to the higher. And how do you do that? He says, from next set of verses, 16 to 29, he says, you must cultivate this discriminative capacity of discriminating the self from the equipments. If you don't have it, you miss the game of spiritual life. You don't know what it is. All right. I see all of you have commented to the question or the discussion we had. I think all of you are very, very, very right in all what you have said, you know. So I hope the concept is clear. All right.